afternoon. It is wonderful to see all of you, and it's wonderful to be here with my team at the National Federation Conference. Thank you to Linda for everything she has done in organizing this. Thanks for inviting us to speak. I am Kimberly Hoagwood. I am with New York University in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and also New York State in the Office of Mental Health. And I run research projects that I try to keep real, and I keep them real by working with people like the ones you're about to meet. We want to talk with you today about a family-to-family peer support model that we are developing and testing that is for young adults with serious mental illness. Most often it's schizophrenia. We wanted to focus on this because this study is part of a larger center, research center that I run in New York that's focused on making policies more evidence-based so that those policies can improve the mental health and the public health for the citizens who are receiving the services. So we work on closing that gap between research evidence and policy. We selected the study that we're going to talk with you about today because it is designed specifically to focus on individuals who've had a first psychotic break. First episode psychosis is what it's called. These first episode psychosis programs are in every state across the country, thanks to SAMHSA and NIMH, who work together in order to be able to provide block grant funding for these programs. So we were looking for a program that was national, that was in all the states, in order to develop a program, a service package for family peer-to-peer support that would be feasible, that would be generalizable, that would be disseminable. And those are our goals. We recognize that for the first episode psychosis programs, which use coordinated specialty care, so the care is integrated, it's very focused on the young adult or sometimes adolescents who have schizophrenia, who've had their first episode. The research has shown very clearly, if you intervene early, if you get in there early, you can change the trajectory for these young people. You can help promote a healthier and happier life for them and for their families, but you've got to do it early. These coordinated specialty programs most often, and certainly in New York, include peer support specialists. And so these are young adult or sometimes older adult peer specialists, part of the team. However, there is no such role for family peer support specialists. And we recognized that caregivers bear the brunt of the work that needs to be done for the loved one in their families. They're there for the long haul. And you're going to hear from my colleagues here how important that is. And yet there's no support for them in the majority of these services across the country. So we decided that we wanted to focus our study specifically on that. Can we adapt? Can we develop? Can we test a model of family peer-to-peer support for caregivers of loved ones, young adults with schizophrenia or other psychoses? So we're going to talk with you about that today. Let me move. Oh, somebody moved the slide already, which was good. We are part of the Ideas Center, as I mentioned, and this is our third and final project. We're in our last year. We are going to talk about the study, and next year we're going to have all the data from it, we hope. The significance of this, as I said, is that the families are right in the midst of the services and of finding those services and of dealing with their loved one to make sure they're able to access services, to stay on medications, et cetera. And yet often they are sort of left out of the equation in our current service system. Our study is designed to build on the research of others. And I think that's really important. Family peer-to-peer support has been studied for a number of years. We've done work in that arena, so have others. So we're building on the shoulders of others to a certain extent, and yet finding a model specifically for caregivers with the First Episode Psychosis programs of young adults was, there was nothing. There was literally nothing. So we took a well-designed and well-studied program called Parent Connectors, and we have adapted it for the population that we're working with. And you're going to hear about some of those adaptations. I guess I can move ahead. There is research. We have all of these resources and references available, and the slides will be available to you as well. 5 components of peer-delivered family support. Informational, this comes from literature reviews that we've done and others have done. You have informational support, basically education. Many families just need to know what to do and where to go for help. So that's an important piece of that. There is also instrumental support, which is more helping people do something, going with them to a meeting, for example, very, very down to earth. There's emotional support, which you will hear a lot about because that actually has become one of the core features of the model that we're testing. And there's advocacy support. So these kinds of supports all blend together when you have skilled and highly trained family peer-to-peer specialists. And I know some of you are exactly that, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. But these tend to be the components that have come up from the research. In this first phase of our study, we wanted to survey all of the families who had received the coordinated specialty care, or their loved one had received the coordinated specialty care, to find out from them, what is it that you feel you need in order to be able to help your child, your son, your daughter, when they are discharged from the program. And one of the things that we heard from the families was that information about discharge and where to go and how to get help and how hard to push for what kinds of help and how to make sure that my son or my daughter stays on the medication, how to deal with the providers. That was a big black hole. And so we decided we were going to make our model at that point of discharge from the First Episode program, from the coordinated specialty care program. I think I have already covered this. By basically what this is, as I mentioned, we want it to be feasible, generalizable, disseminable. So this model is delivered over the phone for 6 months with weekly phone calls to the caregivers whose loved one is being discharged from the program. And the interventionists are the women here that I'm going to introduce in just a moment. They are the ones who, without knowing who they're talking with with any detail, without knowing much about their story, they need to connect with these moms and these dads or these family members and help them get the services they need, help them advocate for themselves and for their loved one. Help support them through the experience that they have had and through the fact that they have been in the shoes of the people that they're working with. They have that lived experience, and that's a critical piece. So we have made this a fairly, I won't say inexpensive because that's not the point, but it's something that can be done from anywhere for any period of time. We are testing it out for 6 months because the literature suggested that might be enough. We've found in some cases it isn't. So we've adapted it for that purpose. And we are doing this as a randomized trial. So because this is NIMH funded as part of our Ideas Center, we wanted to use the highest scientific rigor in our design. So it's a randomized controlled trial where we are taking people, caregivers whose loved one has been discharged, and assigning them to either get a family connector right away or to get one after a few months, after a period of time where they're on a wait list. So this is going to enable us to look at the outcomes with respect to their caregivers' self-efficacy, their sense of empowerment, their activation, as well as their loved ones' outcomes. And so we're going to be able to look at both of those when we finish the study and gather the data. This is our recruitment flow right now. We are, as I say, in the middle of the trial. And we're very eager to learn what we can from this. In addition to the trial, we're also doing qualitative interviews with all of the caregivers who have received the services to find out from them which parts worked, which parts didn't, how can we adapt it better. The last thing I'm going to say is that the adaptations themselves have been necessary because most of the work I've done and that others have done for family peer-to-peer support is not with family members who have loved ones with serious mental illness. And I mean serious mental illness, which is often life or death. And I'm not exaggerating there. So the intensity of the needs of the caregivers, of the family members who are working with these loved ones is much more acute than what we see typically in the families that we work with. Families that we've worked with in New York, largely what we need is to engage them in services. We need to teach them how to talk to the providers, talk to the pediatricians, talk to the teachers, whoever. The families we're working with here, they're fully engaged. Engagement is not the issue. It's more, how do I talk to a provider if my son or daughter is now an adult and the provider won't talk to me, the prescriber won't talk to me? How do I deal with that? Where do the HIPAA rules come in? Where's the confidentiality issues and how do I deal with that if I'm really worried about my son and daughter? So the nature of the issues that we're dealing with in this peer-to-peer, family-to-family caregiver support is different from what we've done before, and we're learning a lot, and we think it's really important work. I am going to now turn it over to the family connectors who are the interventionists in this trial. And I'm so proud to be able to say that. These are the women who are doing this work day in and day out. We are so grateful to them to be doing this work with us. And I'm just going to mention their names from left to right. Priscilla Shorter, who has been parent advocate with me and my research team for 15 years, I think at least. I have learned so much from her over the years about parent advocacy. Then there's Sally Mason, who is an incredible family connector. You are going to hear her story. Meggin Rose, another incredible family connector. These women have lived experience, I want to say out the wazoo, but I don't even know what that really means. Lori and Tanya. So with that, I am going to right away turn it over to Priscilla. Priscilla.
My research partnership that I've been doing for the past 15 years with Kimberly Hoagwood and others, but mainly with Kimberly, our team approach to doing any type of research that involves family, Kimberly believes in our team, we believe that, someone like me, a community voice, a family voice needs to be on the team from day one, not afterwards coming, day one. And I'm usually that voice. And if it's not me, I'm charged with finding appropriate representation. And I partner with them to bring that voice to our research. And I'm involved with everything from the first meeting with stakeholders to the very last, and then we'll get to all the things that I do, but I'm involved from the very first time, from the very first meeting when Kimberly thought of this a few years ago, I think even before COVID hit. We were having meetings about how we were going to design. I'm part of the research design. Who were going to be our stakeholders and things like that. And things changed over time until we finally got it right. I'm also in part of vetting all the measures for that the families will be receiving, or like any type of questionnaires, surveys, measures. I vet all of them, even to the point where one study we were doing, I got a thick packet of, and it was a very involved kind of you know, the design of the research study was kind of involved. So we had like a nice stack of measures, and I remember going through all of the measures, and I was in a state. I was traumatized. I was like, there's no way we're giving this to families. I said, I need therapy after this. I said, because you've opened up all these wounds, and needless to say that that measure got nixed. We found another way to get the information, but that's the part of being on these teams, like a person who has lived experience, who've been in the communities, and I'm a family member. You can't, you know, ask so many things of us and not, you know, help us afterwards. How are we going to, how are you going to comfort me after I've answered all these questions about my, you know, childhood traumas? So we changed a lot of things, and it's, you know, Kimberly always listens to what I say. And sometimes it gets to the point where I'm like, Kimberly, I'm sorry. You know, I complain or I have to find fault. She's like, nope, that's your job. It's your job. This is what you do. This is what keeps me on target. So I have, you know, this is what I've been doing with her for the past 15 years. So I actually conduct research as well. I conduct interviews with families. I you know, enter the data sometimes. I revise all of the training materials that we use as family connectors and in other projects. We even create training materials. Oh, actually need to, yeah. Is that one up? No. That one. There you go. So, and is it the right one up now? Yeah. Right. So I'm sorry for my voice. All the training materials involved. One of the great pleasures that I had to do on this particular project was interview and vet every last one of these women up here. Kimberly was like, you need to go over all the resumes when they come in. You give the recommendations, and if you're satisfied with them, I want to interview them, or the team will interview them. So I'm happy to say that I was a part of that whole process, and I am a family connector too. So these are my sisters. We all work together. I am an interventionist as well on this project, and the last thing I want to say is like having partnering with researchers as peer advocates or family peer advocates, peer specialists, we're called so many different names. It improves the quality of the work. And I'm not, you know, Kimberly, she's just smart and wise. Like, she's a great person, but this is a smart thing to do. It's a very wise thing to do because it improves the quality of the work. And the findings are more relevant to the population that you're serving. So me being a part of the team means there's always someone there looking out and protecting families. And because some researchers see them as subjects, which they're not, they're families, we're people. And I'm always there to remind any researcher, I don't never have to remind Kimberly, but any researcher, we're people, you know, it's not subjects, we're participants, but we're people too. So that is my short and long of partnership with research for family peers, and hopefully you'll be able to partner with researchers at some time in your career, because the work is so meaningful when you have that voice on it, and you don't have to backtrack and do things over, because if you have us from the beginning, you usually get things right. So.
I'm Sally Mason. By the time a child is diagnosed with SMI, they are usually over 18 with the legal right to privacy under FERPA and HIPAA, which allows them to deny you as their caregiver access to their school and medical records, no less guaranteeing them the right to homelessness if that is their choice, no matter how irrational. If your loved one is fortunate enough to secure a coveted spot in a First Episode Psychosis comprehensive program like OnTrackNY, and they agree to participate in its programs and therapies, and they agree to take their meds for 2 years, all big ifs, or if they get to stay in their FEP program a year or two more, then they may be discharged well on their way to recovery, only to relapse, no matter how savvy and determined a caregiver they have, because there are no mental health services available in their communities. So here are some of the biggest barriers for families. It's time for this. Oh, sorry. There you go. Okay. Oh, one more, sorry. Oh, yeah. Oh, all right. Here are some of the biggest barriers for families. Inadequate reimbursements for psychiatrists and therapists, private providers who do not accept insurance, understaffing and consequently long wait lists, hospitals' refusal to admit patients who are not in imminent enough threat to harm themselves or others for their insurers to authorize admission, inappropriate discharge after, quote, stabilization, unquote. On top of these tragic barriers to accessing medical care, the illness itself presents one of the most intractable barriers to care, anosognosia, a big, hard to pronounce word for a patient's denial of SMI, which is often a telling symptom of schizophrenia. Sadly, anosognosia, which occurs in about 50% of people diagnosed with schizophrenia, here we go. Sadly, anosognosia is, in the words of Dr. Xavier Amador, a significant barrier to treatment and recovery for young adults with SMI, specifically psychosis disorders. When a loved one has anosognosia, they will likely believe that they are not sick and don't need help. They will often be non-compliant with medications, which increases the likelihood of serious and sometimes life and death consequences for them and for their caregivers. Anosognosia is at the top of my list of problematic behaviors in a young person with SMI. The word comes from the Greek for lack of insight or awareness. It's a name coined in 1914 to describe stroke victims who couldn't tell their left side was paralyzed. It also describes the phenomenon of phantom limbs in amputees who think their missing limb is still there and that it still feels actual pain. Similarly, young adults experiencing first episode psychosis often hear voices that are not there, see hallucinations that are not real, believe delusions that are not true, while also suffering from disorganized thinking and behavior, as well as negative symptoms, all of which leads them to exhibit anosognosia. These unfortunate young people have literally lost their mind and cannot find it due to mental illness. So their mind compensates for this profound loss by thinking that they are not sick and do not need help. Their denial is not defiance. SMI is a brain disease that is visible as lesions on the brain, as you can see on the slide showing a normal brain versus a brain in a person diagnosed with schizophrenia. Anosognosia is a coping strategy that a mentally ill person cannot control any more than they can control their perception of the hallucinations and delusions they believe to be real. Personal examples. My son became adept at cheeking his pills and spitting them out later and at palming them and throwing them away. I know someone else whose child would spit out their meds in the yard when their parents weren't looking. That child also manifested anosognosia by rationalizing their SMI in a variety of ways. Quote, I am not sick and I've had a spiritual awakening. Quote, there's nothing wrong with me. You guys are dead and are telling me I am sick through a pre-recorded message. My 27-year-old son had 3 involuntary hospitalizations and 2 voluntary hospitalizations for SMI from summer 2016, when he had his first psychotic break after flunking out of college, to fall 2021, when he returned to living full-time at college again. During these 5 years, he had 2 suicide attempts. One time he deeply sliced his arm with a large carving knife, and the other time he rode his bike into oncoming traffic. He also stayed out all night in the cold several times, threatened his twin brother by writing an X in blood on his bedroom door, composed scary and threatening emails to friends and relatives, broke mirrors, windows, and smashed TVs. You can only imagine the state of worry I was in. The doctors were trying one medicine after another: Risperdal, olanzapine, Trileptal, Lamictal, Depakote, Cogentin, Prozac, Abilify. The list goes on, but none of them were bringing him back to himself. Finally, in the summer of 2018, his care team at OnTrack introduced clozapine, an underutilized last resort drug for treatment-resistant schizophrenia. And over the next 3 years, he gradually stabilized, coming to terms with his illness and working hard to overcome its disabilities and the difficult side effects of the drugs that helped him the most, including sleeping 10 to 12 hours a day, gaining 75 pounds, and developing OCD. Still, he was much better. He had found the mind he had lost and returned to being himself. the sweet, bright, talented, kind, diligent, highly competent young man that he was before he came down with schizophrenia. After graduating from college in 2022, my son returned home and still lives with me, and I still watch him take his meds every night, either in person or via FaceTime if I am out. This ritual supports his adherence to his pill regimen, which is essential to his continued recovery. He has worked steadily and is taking courses to become a peer advocate himself. But to tell the truth, I am most comforted by the fact that he now takes a shower every day. Our lives are very calm and normal these days, but it took 7 years to get here. There is no time to say more, but I want to leave you with the image of an August 29th New York Times article about a 52-year-old mentally ill man named Andrew Jerome Washington, who was fatally shot during the police's 7th visit to his home in a month. Mr. Washington had stopped taking his medications, and his family was very worried and frightened as his mental health spiraled downward. The article explains that in 2012, the police had needed to subdue him by shooting him in the arm in almost identical circumstances. The family had reached out to the Jersey City Medical Center repeatedly in recent days, but somehow their loved one was never safely transported to a hospital for the treatment they were begging for him to receive. This is a tragic failure of the system. Recently, New York City has implemented a new policy to be able to involuntarily transport homeless people with SMI suffering life-threatening neglect on the streets to hospitals for long-term treatment. On June 25th, the New York Times reported Orlando Solano had sought help for his brother for years. When his brother was removed to a hospital against his will, Mr. Solano said his mental health finally improved. This is the humane outcome our loved ones with SMI all deserve. Ultimately, it is more humane and probably less expensive than revolving door, 48-hour hospitalizations, or worse, permanent incarceration resulting from violent crimes committed by untreated mentally ill people in the throes of psychotic delusions. Society has a moral imperative to overcome its own anosognosia about the devastating consequences of letting serious mental illness go ignored and untreated. The failure to do so in the face of overwhelming evidence of how many individuals with SMI and their families can be helped now and how many tragedies can be averted is not only reprehensible, it is unfathomable.
Cultural humility. So when we're doing this work, it's interesting because we're on the phone. We don't see the caregiver. We don't know the last name. We sometimes don't even know what area or what city they live in. So we step into this work having to do a lot of growth and work through the lens of cultural humility. So when we look at the cultural iceberg, right, we see that there's certain things we always associate with culture, which is what? Exactly. What else? Exactly. What else? The race, ethnicity, right? Where they live, right? And things of that nature. But when we take a deeper look, we also see that culture is their beliefs. Culture is how they process. Culture is ways in which they heal. Culture is how they raise their children and what they deem respectful and disrespectful. Culture is everything about them, and we need to take the time to explore all of those layers, which is easier said than done on the phone, right? It's amazing what you take for granted when you walk into a client's house and see But when you're on the phone, you have to take that extra step to sometimes step into uncomfortable places and explore some of those underlining values. So you have to do a lot of your own work, right? And when we look at cultural humility, we look at creating safety, right? Creating safety for ourselves, for the people we work with, for the clients. We look at empowerment, right? And recognizing we don't give empowerment. People have their own empowerment. We just assist them in seeing it sometimes. Sometimes you can't see how amazing you are. So we need to give you a little reminder, community, and any peer support creates community, right? And how we relate to community and meaning and what we say and how we say it and the language that we use, which is paramount, right? Because language will either draw someone in or disconnect them altogether. And when we look at emotional and cultural intelligence, we see that we need to work on our own. And we do this all the time with our own self-awareness, right? And tracking bias. If you have a brain, you have a bias. And everything you experience in life will continue to create bias. So to move away from that shame and say, okay, I'm human, so let me start doing the work around this and let me recognize the filter that I'm coming from. We look into self-management. So I have my own bias. I have my own triggers. Ooh, and they might come up. So how am I going to manage that? And to know when I need to take a step back. And I think a beautiful thing that was created out of this pilot was a separate weekly meeting where we could all meet together, just the family connectors, and we discuss things that are maybe weighing heavy on us, and we discuss ways to increase our emotional intelligence. And a good example is Lori had a family who was not originally from this country. And although there were services available, were they the right services? And in one meeting, we all sat on Zoom and hit Google, Safari, you name it, every which way we could, and we found options, right? Because people deserve choices. So we do that often, and we increase our own learning so that we could share it. And I would love to read that, but I'm blind. So relationship management, and I think I touched on that, right? Monitoring how we relate to other people and how we share our experiences, but they're ours. And we don't shape somebody else's view, right? And empathy and social awareness, to empathize with you in a respectful manner, to empathize with you in a way that gives grace for your needs to be heard. So as we do this, we create trust, because without trust, you're never going to know what the family truly needs. So we do a lot of work to create anonymous intimacy. And that's the way we've kind of captured it.
I really can't believe that I get to work with these women. Okay. The key takeaways from my presentation are both for providers and for caregivers. For providers, caregivers provide essential information for the most accurate risk assessment for patients with serious mental illness. Listen to caregivers. And for caregivers, it's important to understand HIPAA, FERPA, and assisted outpatient treatment known as AOT in order to support your loved one's safety and autonomy. Talk to your loved one's providers and speak so that you are heard. First of all, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not giving legal advice. I'm sharing my understanding of the uses and misuses of HIPAA and FERPA based on my own research and experience both as a parent caregiver and as a family connector. Everyone involved with the love, care, and treatment of people with serious mental illness wrestles with finding a balance between supporting the person's autonomy, understanding their capacity to make healthy decisions, and minimizing the risks they face living with serious mental illness. Taking a collaborative team approach to supporting the strongest recovery for them means we must listen to and question each other. HIPAA and FERPA, what are they? HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It has created a national standard for the protection of certain types of healthcare information for people 18 and older. So if you are a caregiver of somebody who's 17 with a serious mental illness, you have access to all of their information. You can talk to their doctors. The doctors can talk back to you. When that person turns 18, unless they sign a HIPAA release, the doctor doesn't get to tell you what's going on. And that's huge. FERPA is the same thing as HIPAA, only on university and secondary, post-secondary school, federally funded campuses. So if you're a student and you're 18 or older, and the university or school doesn't get to tell you anything other than what's it called? The information that would be seen on social media about who attends the school. This is the hard part of the speech. You ready? You ready? Okay. HIPAA, FERPA, AOT, find out what they mean to me. PROTECT, taking care of you and me. Sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me. There we go, there you go. These laws are meant to protect. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Aretha. These laws are meant to protect not just our information, but also our lives. Too often covered entities, the people and institutions under HIPAA and FERPA regulations, err to the side of protecting private health information over people's health and safety. It's important for all of us to know that HIPAA and FERPA do not prevent the sharing of information by caregivers and advocates with providers. You get to say whatever you need to say to a provider, and that does not violate these regulations. What caregivers and others familiar with delusional psychosis and hypermania understand is that the symptoms and behaviors these brain diseases produce are unpredictable and often do not present during brief, superficial interactions with providers and others. That's why our observations and expertise on the condition of our loved one is essential information for the providers and the institutions in which they participate. When caregivers take precautions, including hiding all the rope in the house, installing motion detecting lights in the hallways, sleeping with a hammer under the bed, sleeping in a locked car, and secretly installing tracking devices in a loved one's car and phone, all of which I have done. They're doing so because they understand that though their loved one might not have said, I'm going to kill you right now, or I'm going to kill myself right now, their lives and the lives of others are in danger, and they and their loved one need help. As family connectors and caregivers, we have heard of and experienced situations where providers refused to listen to critical caregiver observations and concerns. In one such circumstance, as a young person who had been seen by their doctor that day and whose parents had expressed great concern, went on to violently attack them in the kitchen with a knife that night. In another case, soon after, the parent told the doctor they feared the child was going to become violent, and the doctor dismissed it and told them to go home. The adult child beat the parent to death with a chair leg. And then jumped out a window to their death. Stories like these are tragic, heartbreaking, and is completely preventable. Oops, I haven't been doing slides. I got so emotional. Oh, I'm all right. HIPAA and FERPA have exceptions that we should all know about and feel confident using. Several circumstances when sharing of personal health information does not violate HIPAA or FERPA. When covered entities believe the loved one lacks the capacity to make rational decisions. When they believe it's in the loved one's best interest for private health information to be shared. And when they believe that others may have the ability to prevent or lessen harm to the loved one or others. These are all circumstances where HIPAA and FERPA fall away and information should and can be shared. When we come up against communication barriers, we need to be able to reference the law's exceptions. If this isn't enough to open communication, we don't give up. We ask to speak to the provider's supervisor. After my loved one became sick and I began my development as a parent advocate, I realized that many times providers had not even read my loved one's chart before seeing them and prescribing medications. So I began requesting that they do so before our next visit. If they didn't have time, I would request an appointment with them during which I would sit there and they could read my child's chart. This was always help them find time to read the chart without me. I call this fierce advocacy. What we know about the health and behavior of our person with serious mental illness can help enable their fullest possible recovery when it is applied to their treatment plan. Assisted outpatient treatment is a less known but important tool for the protection of adults with serious mental illness who have demonstrated that they are not capable of living in their communities in healthy, nonviolent ways without the oversight and support of assisted outpatient treatment services. An AOT enables a judge to mandate involuntary hospitalization due to non-compliance to their AOT specifics. And it enables providers to take protective action before there's an imminent threat. 47 states have the court-ordered provision for AOTs. An AOT can mandate a person's adherence to a variety of treatments and services, including where they live, medication compliance, participation in therapy, and appropriate medical testing in order for them to avoid involuntary hospitalization. My loved one has been on an AOT for over 2 years. It has prevented them from decompensating, suffering more psychotic breaks, avoiding additional hospitalizations and further cognitive damage, and has saved tens of thousands of dollars to the state of New York. When it comes to serious mental illnesses, we caregivers often don't know what we don't know. But many of us also feel anxious, ignorant, or too intimidated to ask providers questions about their treatment of our loved ones. There are important questions caregivers can ask whose answers do not violate HIPAA or FERPA if you don't have a release, and questions providers ought to be asking caregivers. We have included lists of questions caregivers and providers can ask in order for loved ones to get the necessary mental health care they need on our resources page, which you can get, I guess, by scanning one of those fancy little squares. In summary, it's essential that providers and caregivers communicate with each other as much as possible in order to ensure the strongest recovery for people with serious mental illness. HIPAA and FERPA do not prevent or prohibit sharing of critical information when it could help people's health and safety. And that AOTs are extremely helpful in the continuing recovery of people with serious mental illness who would otherwise not be compliant with their treatment. Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks so much, Meggin. We're going to talk a little bit about boundaries, in particular self-care. When a family member has a serious mental illness, its impact goes far beyond their own mind. The ripple effects of disruption, trauma, and fear can engulf the entire family. At the center is the loved one, of course, but the circle grows in concentric rings to encompass a vast array of people, most importantly, caregivers. When working with caregivers, as well as the loved one, trauma-informed care is essential. Siblings, children, and partners each suffer because of this frightening, life-changing disease. So much of the caregiver's time is taken up by the loved one with the serious mental illness. As a result, siblings and partners get less attention than they are used to or need. The caregiver is probably working with very limited resources, including time, financial, and emotional. Caregivers and their families are in a constant state of hypervigilance, that fight or flight mode, because we never know when the mentally ill loved one may take a turn for the worse, may have a setback, harm themselves or others. Families have had to hide all the knives and scissors, have had to sleep with a bat or hammer under the bed, put locks on bedroom doors, wonder when and if their loved one will come home after going for a walk, sleep on a mattress by the front door to make sure their loved one doesn't wander out in the middle of the night. They always have to worry about harm to their other children or just neglect of other family members because of all the time devoted to keeping their loved one with serious mental illness safe. Let me tell you, it's exhausting. It's traumatizing, and that worry never goes away. That's why it's of the utmost importance for a caregiver to engage in self-care themselves. For me, it's taking a long walk every day. I was out on the river this morning at 7:30 in the morning. I joke that I do my best writing when I am walking because it gives me time to think and clear my head. My daughter has also added self-care tools to her toolbox. When my daughter was younger, she would never hurt a fly growing up. She literally used to put her hand out and butterflies would just land on it. We never expected her to become violent and try to attack us and break things in the house. Hearing from a therapist that violence is not acceptable is not enough. No one wants to call 911 and have 4 police show up to their door and take their child away. Now my daughter knows how to address her symptoms in a much more constructive way and has developed her own boundaries. About 5 years ago, I lost my daughter. I'm not referring to death, but a different kind of loss. One where you grieve just the same. I lost my daughter to serious mental illness. She was still physically there, but mentally and emotionally, she was gone. There is certainly grief for your loved one, the dreams for the future they might never realize, but the caregiver also experiences grief, both for their loved ones and for themselves. Grieving does not negate strength, but it is tiresome to carry that weight all the time. Some of us have loved ones who are no longer there. They may be living on the streets, they may be sitting in prison, or worse. They are gone, but our trauma continues. When you have a child, your life revolves around them, and you would do anything for that child. But you also expect them to thrive and eventually leave home after college. Many of us with children with serious mental illness will never have that opportunity to have an empty nest. We need to make plans to support our children for the rest of our lives and make plans for their future. We often have to resort to secrecy to conceal something that is considered shameful, to avoid disgrace, and to protect both the caregiver and the loved one. As a result, we become isolated and experience stigma. You feel like you are falling and that you are the only one who has had those experiences. For the caregiver, having someone who understands and can empathize is of the utmost importance. Knowing you are not alone helps people understand the illness and engage with services both for themselves and their loved ones. And it also helps to reduce the isolation and stigma. My daughter has actually been sick her entire life. I knew there was something wrong with her shortly after she was born. I brought her back to the doctor, hoping to get some support, and was told to just go home because the doctor said I was just being hormonal. Contrast that experience with one I had with my daughter's neurologist. From the ages of 6 through 9, my daughter had such intense seizures, she would have to be hospitalized every 4 to 6 months. Her neurologist asked, "What do you think of the idea of trying a new medication for her?" I was shocked to be asked my opinion and replied, "You're the doctor." To which he responded, "Yes, but I'm not with her 24 hours a day. You are." He is the only doctor in over 20 years who has ever asked for my input. The most successful treatment approach for recovery from serious mental illness depends on this team approach, which should include at a minimum a psychiatrist, a therapist, a peer advocate for the loved one, and a family peer advocate to support the caregivers. I could have really used a family peer advocate when my daughter became ill with a serious mental illness. I had no idea what was happening and could have used, oops, no, I lost my place, sorry, and could have used an empathetic ear. However, this team is incomplete without the inclusion of the caregiver and the loved one, who must be considered integral members of the team. When you include caregivers and family peer advocates as part of the treatment team, it gives you access to essential information. Without that information, providers don't have a complete picture. It's not a complete puzzle. Working as a team results in a more tailored treatment and overall better outcomes. And before we'd like to entertain any questions, I would just like to thank, or we all would like to thank Dr. Hoagwood for starting this program and allowing us to do this incredibly important work. I'd like to we'd also like to thank Dr. Paige Cervantes, who is not here with us today, but who is our coach and who meets with us religiously every week and listens to our story in awe, because she just had her first child recently. And also we'd like to thank Charlotte, who is sitting here, who arranged all of this and made sure we had what we needed and did all those slides. So thank you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Violet.
Thank you. You can see why I love to go to work every day. with these folks. We have time for a few questions and love to hear what you would like to know. Do not be shy, because we're not. Yes. We're from New York, so the program itself comes from a grant from NIMH to New York University to me, basically, or to the institution for doing this study. But because it's a program that exists in every state, we're hoping that what we learn from this can be used by other programs across the country. Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The first episode.
There, yes, so SAMHSA and NIMH joined forces about 5 years ago. And with the research about the importance of intervening early, they were able to make the argument that that state block funds needed to be designated for first episode psychosis programs. They go by many different names in New York. It's OnTrackNY New York, so it might have a different name. But basically, yes, every state has state block money set aside for first episode psychosis programs.
But those don't include
That's right.
family peer connectors.
That's
Yeah, so
exactly.
that's what we're saying
we're
needs to
trying to
happen.
get- yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep, that's why we're doing this. Yes. Yeah, I saw another hand somewhere. I thought,
Over here.
yes. Oh, do any of you heard of it? Young adults taking care of the parents, sort of role reversal?
That's an interesting
Not
concept.
yet. No,
Yeah.
we've had,
No, yeah.
we've had siblings taking
Yes.
care of each other,
Yes.
grandparent,
Grandparent, yes.
but
But no,
no
nothing
children
reverse.
taking care of their adult.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Because their older parent wouldn't be in the early program,
They
you
wouldn't
know.
be
because
qualified,
they'd be
right?
too old.
Yeah.
They
Yeah, the
wouldn't-
OnTrack New York program is for loved ones between the ages of 16 and 30.
Good questions. Anything else?
Over here.
Yes, thank you.
Just a logistic question of how many families would you connect with?
Good
That's a
question.
good question.
But now recruitment has been going, it's been, we've had to recruit, it's been slower. So we have one family each.
We have 20,
Yeah.
23 families
But at
who
times
have
we-
been through the program. And as they come in, we consent them, we randomly assign them.
Yeah.
So at any given time,
We
you
could have
guys have
two. You could have-
two
you
or
could have
two or three.
Two is the most of the time
And
so
it-
far.
Right,
yeah.
and so there's, because it's randomized, there are that many people who would like to participate
Yeah.
and can't, because it's a study.
But we will get them in.
Yeah,
They're
get
on
them
a
in.
wait list and then
Yeah, 4 months.
everybody will get in and then they get 6 months of this expertise. Yes, yes.
You can
Uh,
check, you know what? I
I
just
don't
went
think
to a
so.
meeting, for another job. NAMI has something similar. It's only for 3 months. They announced it. So if you have a NAMI, in your state, look for it. It's like a parent to parent kind of thing, but it's a 3 months. It's a new program that they have.
Hmm.
It's a 3 month and it's for an hour every 2 weeks. It's not every week.
Okay.
But it's similar to what we're doing, but not the same thing. But that's the only thing I can think of that would
Oh,
be,
That's good that
yeah.
they just started.
yeah, they just started it, yeah. Well,
Yeah, yes.
that,
Yeah, they're in my.
Listen,
dilemma, yeah.
Well,
Our hearts
well,
break.
let me, let you guys answer. You guys answer.
what, okay,
We were able, because 6 months is such an arbitrary time, and this is incredibly intimate work, right? You're incredibly intimate work. We make a judgment about whether our people are really hooked up enough, feels empowered enough to discontinue our phone calls and our support. And if they're not, if it feels like they need a little more, maybe their loved one's in crisis, maybe something else is going on in their life and it's just too much, we can extend up to 2 months. And we've been doing that pretty regularly. But other than that, there's a cliff.
Unfortunately.
Yes. Oh,
no, it's strictly for
It's
the family,
care.
remember? Yeah.
Strictly
And we
for-
can,
Yes,
Yes. That's a
good question.
You spend quite a bit of time on the discharge, well, not discharge, but termination Right, so that there's some preparation there.
Yeah.
We
But
did
it's
that.
actually an empirical question. How long is the right amount? You know, how long should this be? We've had some feedback. We're doing interviews with all the caregivers who've received the service, and some of them are saying 6 months is about right, but we would have liked it maybe twice a week sometimes, and maybe every 2 weeks other times. So flexibility within that. But that's one of the things we're trying to understand better.
I would just
And
like
you
to
had a
add
second
that
question too. Yeah,
during that 6 months, the whole point of these phone calls is to get them to engage in services, whatever that means to them. It could be connecting with NAMI. It could be getting their own therapist, so that when that 6 months, or in some cases 8 months comes, they're not falling off that cliff.
And
I
it's,
think-
you know, it's also really challenging for us to find the resources to refer to them because
Correct.
there aren't enough. So sometimes it is kind of like good luck.
And as far as the curriculum, we're all trained, we have a manual, but then we infuse the parts of ourselves, right? That make us individual and just help us engage families in the way that we engage.
We've all done that.
Mhm.
And we always say, we're not therapists, we're not doctors.
Absolutely
Yeah,
not.
we aren't, so.
And we
People
all
know.
trained to be family peer advocates as well. We did at least the online training.
Credentialing.
Credentialing,
Yes.
yeah.
But their,
All provisional, well,
but their life,
Yeah.
their lived experience, I learned so much from them. Like they are teaching me, no, seriously. They teach me so much about this particular population.
yeah, it's a club we
Um,
never wanted to join.
Yes, yeah, it's like, we were drafted into it just
I think
because.
there was another question. Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
and credentialed.
Commodores.
Yes.
You know, that's a book I use a lot in my work for parents that I feel are ready to connect it to that level of that sort of mind-blowing perspective.
Mhm.
Because I feel like there's a huge ripping to the clinical model from many people in the I work in the First Episode Psychosis program in Maine. And it just seems like there's this real ripping thing to the idea, and I saw it on your thing too, this idea that there is a cure and
Mhm.
that there's gonna be this medicine and that this is taking so long, and I'm sure if anybody's working in a First Episode Psychosis program, it's not unusual. But I guess my curiosity is sort of coupling that perspective with something that's sort of as, intense as, which I didn't know what these were, the AOS.
AOT.
IoT.
Yes, and also, you know, sort of going around the HIPAA, not going around, but like utilizing HIPAA, which as a parent of someone with psychosis spectrum disorder, I like totally see it, and then when I take a step back, it's like I'm able to sort of better balance the respect for sort of the agency and the choice and voice of the person. Which of course, when we're talking about my young child who has not lived outside of my home independently,
Right.
it's that perspective can get a little bit cloudy if they paranoid place decide to restrict.
I think Amadore's stuff too talks about partnering and a shared decision-making model, which for me has been really helpful both in my own situation and to share with other caregivers in this work. The idea that it's not that as a caregiver, my main job is to maintain trust and to access services, not to make decisions for my child, right? I want the services to either convince them or force them, frankly.
That's the AOT.
The last week, I know we're late on time, but this is so fascinating that, so that
Assisted outpatient treatment, AOT.
yeah, so for most people or anyone that wanted to share direct lived experience, is that something that people enter voluntarily?
No, it's
No, that's the whole
It's
point.
involuntary outpatient treatment. Yeah, it's a judge mandated thing they have to adhere to, and that usually the psychiatrist and providers come up with a list of requirements that need to be met. And initially, an AOT is a year long, and it can be renewed for 6 months or a year, 6 months or a year, depending on whether the judge adjudicating and the psychiatrists making a case for, and in my case, my child having his own lawyer represent him and speak for him in court, say whether he's able to be off it or not.
I mean, it helps a lot though, because it
Yeah.
allows the,
Yeah.
I could see, I mean,
You
I
know,
could see that it's.
every state has different,
Yeah.
every state has different
Right.
laws about AOT.
Yeah.
And you should
But they're
definitely
similar.
find out what's
In Maine.
available in Maine.
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
We are going to hang around here up
right.
front if you have any other questions, but I think otherwise we need to close this down. Please help me thank these
Thank you.
incredible people. And thank you so much for coming.